The morning light filters through the stained glass of a quiet church in Memphis. Inside, the air carries a familiar sound, the deep, trembling echo of an organ. Once, that same voice that filled these walls used to fill the world. It belonged to Al Green, a man whose music defined love for an entire generation. He had the fame, the gold records, the applause. Yet somewhere between the stage and the silence, he heard another calling, one that would take him far from the spotlight and closer to salvation. How does a soul singer at the top of the world leave it all behind to find peace in the pulpit? Let's get into his story right now. Let me know where you're watching this from in the comments. Grab yourself a warm drink, maybe a cup of water or tea, sit back, and let's start this journey together. Long before the lights, before the fame, before the word legend ever touched his name, there was just a boy in Forest City, Arkansas. His world was small dirt roads, wooden houses, and the steady rhythm of gospel music drifting from the local church. That boy was Albert Green, the sixth of 10 children born to Robert and Cora Lee Green. His earliest memories were filled with hymns, the echo of hand claps, and the sound of his mother's voice blending into the choir. In the evenings, the Green family gathered around their small radio, tuning into sermons and gospel quartets. Music was not just entertainment, it was survival. It carried them through the long workdays and into Sunday mornings when faith felt like the only luxury they could afford. From that foundation, Al Green's voice began to bloom, soft but sure, fragile yet fearless. At 9, he joined his siblings to form a gospel group called the Green Brothers. They sang in small churches and county fairs across the Mid-South, earning nickels and smiles from congregations who swayed to their harmonies. For young Al, the stage wasn't about glory, it was about belonging. Each note was a way to prove he existed beyond the walls of poverty. By the late 1950 decade, the family relocated to Grand Rapids, Michigan, chasing opportunity and steadier work. But with the move came new temptations. Teenagers around him were listening to Jackie Wilson and Sam Cooke, men who made sacred passion sound sinful, who turned devotion into desire. Al was captivated. One evening, his father caught him secretly listening to Jackie Wilson's Baby Workout. That single moment would change everything. His father, a devout man who believed gospel was the only righteous music, exploded with fury. Words turned to shouts, shouts turned to orders, and by the end of that night, Al was kicked out of his home. He was still just a teenager, lost, proud, and too stubborn to apologize. He moved in with a local woman, a prostitute who taught him about the other side of life. Between the smoke, the noise, and the hustle, he learned how fragile morality could be when survival came first. Those years hardened him, but also gave his music something rare: authenticity. He had lived the hurt he would later sing about. By 16, Al decided to bet everything on his voice. He gathered a few high school friends and formed Al Green and the Creations. The group rehearsed in basements and backyards, trying to imitate the Motown sound pouring from Detroit radio stations. They performed at local clubs until 2 of the members, Curtis Rogers and Palmer James, took a bold step. They founded their own record label, Hotline Music Journal. It was there that the group reinvented themselves as Al Green and the Soul Mates. In 1968, they recorded a song that would change Al's life, Back Up Train. No one expected it to be a hit, but when that train started rolling, it didn't stop. The single climbed regional charts, spreading from Michigan to Memphis, and suddenly, Al Green, the boy who had once been thrown out for listening to secular music, was being celebrated for it. The success was small, fragile, and fleeting, but for Al, it was proof that his voice could carry him beyond the church walls. Yet behind the newfound success, the same emptiness remained. The other singles failed to chart, the album struggled, and the group disbanded almost as quickly as it had come together. Once again, Al found himself alone, carrying his guitar, his faith, and a quiet determination that whispered, "This can't be the end." And one night, performing at a small club in Texas, fate stepped in wearing a sharp suit and a Memphis smile. In the crowd was Willie Mitchell, a producer known for shaping the warm, horn-driven sound that defined Southern soul. Mitchell was mesmerized by the young man's voice, the way it cracked and soared, how it seemed to reach for heaven even when singing about heartbreak. After the show, Mitchell approached him and said simply, "Son, You don't know who you are yet, but I can help you find it. That meeting would set the stage for everything that came next. The fame, the music, the faith, and the fall. But in that moment, standing under the neon lights of a tiny club, Al Green wasn't thinking about destiny. He was just grateful someone finally heard him. Before the red carpets and flashing lights, before the headlines and heartbreak, there was just a young man with a voice too big for the room and a dream that refused to die. When Willie Mitchell first heard Al Green sing, he knew he was listening to something holy, not polished, not perfect, but real. There was a raw ache in Al's tone, something that felt both sacred and broken. Mitchell, the mastermind behind Memphis's high records, had worked with greats, but this young man from Arkansas was different. He didn't just sing notes, he bled them. Mitchell invited Green to Memphis, to a studio tucked inside Royal Recording, where the walls were lined with faded posters and the smell of cigarette smoke clung to the velvet drapes. The room was small, but it pulsed with life horns, drums, and the warmth of analog tape. "Don't try to sound like anyone else," Mitchell told him. "You already got what they don't." That advice would change everything. In 1969, Al dropped the E from his last name, a quiet act of reinvention. It was more than a stylistic choice. It was symbolic. Albert Green had been the boy singing for belonging. Al Green was the man learning to command a room. That same year, he released his debut album, Green is Blues. The record didn't explode on the charts, but it turned heads. Critics began whispering about a new kind of soul, smoother, slower, drenched in emotion. The follow-up album, Al Green Gets Next to You, arrived in 1970. This time, the world noticed. Songs like Tired of Being Alone struck a chord with anyone who had ever loved and lost. Green's delivery was both intimate and eternal, like a prayer you could dance to. The single climbed the R&B charts, introducing the world to a voice that would soon become its soundtrack. Mitchell became more than a producer. He was a mentor, shaping Al's sound the way a sculptor shapes clay. Together, they discovered the power of restraint, the art of letting silence speak between the notes. Where other singers shouted their pain, Al Green whispered his truth. His music became the heartbeat of a new era, the bridge between the fiery soul of the 1960 decade and the sensual smoothness that would later define the quiet storm. With each session, Green learned how to turn his vulnerabilities into strength. He wasn't chasing fame, he was chasing feeling. By now, the sessions at High Records had become a kind of ritual. Al would arrive in the late afternoon, sometimes barefoot, sometimes in a suit, always carrying his notebook of scribbled lyrics and prayers. Mitchell would nod to the band, the horns would swell, the drums would tighten, and Al's voice would glide over it all like silk dipped in honey. There were nights when the music seemed to rise beyond the studio walls, out into the Memphis sky. The engineers would stop what they were doing, just to listen. It wasn't just soul, it was something divine. And yet, for all the magic happening in those rooms, Al Green still felt like an outsider looking in. Fame hadn't arrived yet, but he could feel it coming, slow and steady, like a train on distant tracks. He didn't know it then, but the songs he was crafting with their longing, their tenderness, their quiet ache, would soon make him the voice of a generation. The world was about to fall in love with Al Green. By the time 1971 arrived, the world was ready and so was Al Green. Inside the dimly lit High Record studio, he stood before the microphone, eyes closed, headphones resting loosely around his neck. Willie Mitchell gave a small nod, and the band began to play the opening chords to a song that would change everything. Let's Stay Together. It wasn't just another love song. It was a declaration, a plea, a prayer wrapped in velvet. Al's voice floated through the room, smooth yet trembling, filled with hope and heartbreak all at once. When the final note faded, there was silence. Then, the engineers looked up from the console, and Mitchell simply smiled. They all knew. The world was about to hear something timeless. When the single hit radio, everything changed overnight. The song climbed the charts, not just in America, but across the Atlantic. People who had never set foot in Memphis could feel its warmth, the slow groove, the tenderness, the grace. Suddenly, Al Green wasn't just another soul singer. He was the soul singer. He followed that triumph with albums that cemented his place in music history. I'm Still in Love with You and Call Me. Each record was a masterpiece of subtlety and emotion. Tracks like Look What You Done For Me and Here I Am, Come and Take Me, proved that Al didn't just perform songs, he inhabited them. Every sigh, every pause, every whisper felt like a confession. By 1973, Al Green had become the voice of love itself. His concerts were sold out, his records went gold, and his face appeared on magazine covers from Ebony to Rolling Stone. Yet despite all the success, there was still something uneasy behind his smile. Fame gave him the spotlight, but it also gave him loneliness, the kind that follows even in crowded rooms. Backstage, between shows, Al often sat alone, reading from his worn Bible. The same voice that had made women cry now sang hymns in the dark. There was a pull inside him, a quiet battle between the stage and the spirit, between the applause of men and the approval of God. Willie Mitchell noticed the change. "You got everything you ever wanted," he told him once. "Don't let it slip away." But Al wasn't sure he even knew what everything meant anymore. Still, he pressed forward. Between 1972 and 1974, he released one classic after another, Livin' For You, Call Me, Al Green Explores Your Mind. Each one carried the same blend of tenderness and truth, painting love as both salvation and sin. His voice became part of America's emotional landscape, the song that played at weddings, heartbreaks, and late-night drives. But at the height of it all, the cracks began to show. The same passion that made his music so powerful also made his personal life chaotic. Fame was intoxicating, and temptation waited in every city, every hotel hallway. Al Green was adored, envied, and pursued, but rarely understood. Still, when he walked into a room, everything stopped. He was that rare kind of artist who didn't just sing to people, he sang for them, through them. In those moments, the world's noise disappeared, and only his voice remained. He didn't know it yet, but the same emotion that lifted him to glory would soon lead him into darkness. The turning point had come, and the fall was not far behind. By 1973, the name Al Green had become more than a name, it was a feeling. In living rooms across America, couples slow danced to his records, their hands resting on each other's shoulders as his voice floated through the speakers. Radio stations played him between the Temptations and Aretha Franklin, but Al stood apart. He was smoother, quieter, yet somehow more intense. His sound wasn't about volume, it was about vulnerability. Each new release was a triumph. The albums I'm Still in Love with You, Call Me, and Livin' For You turned into instant classics. His voice moved like a whisper through a storm, calm, tender, and devastating all at once. The horns in his songs shimmered like sunlight, while the rhythm section pulsed steady, like a heartbeat. There was no artifice, no distance between him and the listener. It felt personal, as if he were singing only to you. On stage, Al Green was pure electricity. He didn't dance like James Brown or shout like Wilson Pickett, he glided. He'd step to the edge of the stage, eyes closed, and the crowd would lean toward him as if pulled by something divine. Women tossed roses at his feet, men watched in awe, and somewhere in the middle of it all, Al smiled shyly, almost embarrassed by the attention. Behind the scenes, Willie Mitchell ran a tight ship. High Records had become a family musicians who played together so often they could read each other's breath. They created a sound that was unmistakably Memphis, warm, human, filled with soul. "Keep it simple," Mitchell would say. "The voice does the rest." And the voice did it carried the weight of desire, devotion, and redemption. When Al released Let's Get Married and Here I Am, Come and Take Me, he seemed untouchable. Every chart he touched turned to gold. He was invited to television specials, award shows, and world tours. He wore sharp suits, pastel shirts, and the easy charm of a man who had finally found his place. But the truth was more complicated. Fame had a way of building a palace around him, one filled with mirrors. Every reflection showed him something different. The preacher's son, the sinner, the superstar. Sometimes, even he couldn't tell which one was real. Still, when he sang, none of that mattered. The music was his truth. His concerts became spiritual events, disguised as love shows. People swayed, cried, laughed. Couples made up to his songs. Others fell apart listening to them. Al Green had become the soundtrack of the American heart. By the end of 1974, his records had sold millions. His voice had conquered both soul and pop, and his name was etched into music history. From the pews of Arkansas to the stages of New York, he had lived the dream that began in those church halls. And yet, in quiet moments between performances, when the applause faded and the dressing room emptied, Al often sat alone, staring at his reflection. He had everything he ever wanted yet. The silence after the music ended felt heavier than the songs themselves. The triumph was real, but so was the emptiness waiting behind it. Fame can fill a room, but it can also leave it empty. For Al Green, the years that followed his greatest triumphs began to feel strangely hollow. The stages were bigger, the applause louder, but the silence afterward grew unbearable. He sang about love every night, yet he struggled to keep it alive in his own life. Somewhere along the road, he met Mary Woodson, a woman who entered his life like a spark, beautiful, passionate, and deeply troubled. She was older, elegant, and mysterious, a presence that both calmed and consumed him. Their relationship was intense, filled with affection one moment and argument the next. Mary wanted marriage. Al wasn't ready. His life was still a whirlwind of touring, temptation, and exhaustion. But for Mary, love wasn't a performance, it was possession. On the night of the 18th of October 1974, everything fell apart. They were in Al's Memphis home, preparing dinner after a long argument. Mary had brought up marriage again, demanding a commitment he still couldn't give. Words turned sharp. Emotions spiraled. Then, in a single moment of rage and heartbreak, she did something no one could have imagined. She took a pot of boiling grits from the stove and threw it at him. The scalding mixture hit his back, arms, and stomach, burning through his skin. Al screamed and stumbled away, but before he could understand what had happened, another sound echoed through the house, a gunshot. Mary had turned his own weapon on herself. The scene was chaos, pain, smoke, disbelief. The police later found a note in her purse, one that spoke of love, despair, and her plan to end her life. Al was rushed to the hospital with second-degree burns, his body wrapped in bandages, but the wounds beneath the skin ran deeper. In the days that followed, reporters swarmed the story. The tabloids painted him as both victim and villain, and Al, shattered and confused, retreated from the public eye. Friends said he spent nights alone, crying, praying, asking God for a reason or forgiveness. For a man who had once sung love and happiness, the words suddenly felt like a cruel echo. That tragedy became a breaking point. The man who once sang to heal others now needed healing himself. In his hospital bed, he reached for the only thing that had ever given him peace, his Bible. For hours, he read the Psalms, tears staining the pages. "God spared me," he whispered to a nurse. "He wants me for something more." When he finally left the hospital, he wasn't the same man. The stage no longer felt like home. The spotlight that once gave him life now felt blinding. The tragedy of 1974 would forever mark a before and after in his story. It was the night the music stopped and faith began to whisper again. He didn't know it yet, but this was the first step toward a new kind of salvation, one that would demand everything fame had given him and more. After the tragedy of 1974, Al Green returned to the stage, but the joy that once fueled him was gone. The burn scars on his back had healed, but something inside him remained raw. Every time he looked out at the audience, every cheer reminded him of the pain he couldn't leave behind. The love songs he once sang so easily now felt heavy, haunted by the woman whose name he could barely say. For a while, he tried to carry on. He went back into the studio with Willie Mitchell, hoping the rhythm of creation would drown out the noise in his head. But the chemistry that had once made magic was gone. The sessions felt cold, mechanical. Al's voice was still beautiful, but it no longer soared, it trembled. By 1976, his record sales began to fall. The world had moved on to disco, to funk, to something faster and shinier. Al Green's tender, meditative sound suddenly felt out of place. Critics called him outdated. Fans whispered that fame had broken him. But behind closed doors, another change was happening, one that no chart could measure. He had started spending more time in church again, searching for peace in the one place that still felt real. The same voice that once sang of passion now sang of prayer. Between recording sessions, he began preaching informally to small groups in Memphis. People said his words carried the same warmth as his music, that he could move hearts without a melody. Then, one night, something happened that would seal his decision forever. During a concert in Cincinnati in 1979, Al was in the middle of a song when he slipped and fell from the stage. The fall could have been fatal. As the audience gasped, he lay there, dazed but alive. Later, he would say he heard a voice not from the crowd, but from somewhere higher. "You've been running long enough," it said. That fall became his moment of clarity. For years, he had felt torn between the stage and the spirit, between applause and absolution. Now, there was no more confusion. He made a promise that night if he lived, he would dedicate his life to God. True to his word, Al purchased a small church in Memphis soon after, naming it the Full Gospel Tabernacle. The building wasn't grand, but it was enough. He renovated it with his own hands, installed an organ, and filled it with pews. The man who had once performed before thousands now stood before dozens, preaching about grace, forgiveness, and redemption. He didn't stop making music immediately, but the tone had shifted. The glittering suits, the love ballads, the stage lights, they no longer defined him. When people came to his shows, they noticed something different. The same passion was there, but it wasn't aimed at fame anymore. It was aimed at heaven. For the first time in years, Al Green's voice didn't sound burdened. It sounded free. When Al Green opened the doors of the Full Gospel Tabernacle, it wasn't just a church, it was a refuge. Inside those humble brick walls, the same voice that once filled arenas now rose in hymns of gratitude. On Sunday mornings, sunlight poured through the stained glass windows, catching the shimmer of his white robe as he stood before the pulpit. "God saved me," he would say softly. "Now I sing for him." But redemption rarely comes without resistance. The man who once stood at the top of the charts now faced skepticism. Some fans thought it was a publicity stunt, a midlife attempt to rewrite the story. Others believed it completely. They saw in his eyes the sincerity that fame could never fake. For Al, it didn't matter. The spotlight that had once felt like a prison was gone, replaced by something purer light from within. Still, the past has a way of following you, even into holy places. As Al began to rebuild his faith, his personal life grew turbulent again. In 1977, he married Shirley Green, one of his background singers and an active member of his congregation. For a time, they seemed happy, a family built on music and faith. They had 3 daughters together. But behind the sermons and Sunday smiles, cracks began to form. Shirley filed for divorce more than once, citing cruelty and violence. In sworn testimonies, she described a man torn between gentleness and rage, the same duality that made his music so haunting. Al denied much of it, though later, under oath, admitted he had struck her. The divorce became final in 1983, leaving scars that neither the courts nor the church could heal. There were other lawsuits, an assistant who claimed he had attacked her, a musician who accused him of assault. Some cases were dropped, others quietly settled. Each story painted a complicated picture. A man who preached forgiveness but still wrestled with his own temper and trauma. To outsiders, it looked like contradiction. To those who listened closely, it sounded like the truth of being human. Through it all, Al turned back to what had always saved him: music. Only now, it was gospel, not soul. Between 1980 and 1985, he released a string of sacred albums. "The Lord Will Make a Way," "Precious Lord," "Trust in God," "He is the Light." Each one felt less like performance and more like penance. His voice carried the weight of confession, a sinner singing his way toward salvation. On stage, he often cried while performing. Sometimes, the audience cried with him. There were no dancers, no bright lights, no glamour. Just a man, a microphone, and a story the world already knew but was hearing again, this time through prayer. In those years, Al Green didn't just change his career, he changed his purpose. The stage had become a sanctuary, the audience had become a congregation, and the same voice that once sang about love was now devoted to grace. He had lost his way before, but through faith, through fire, and through pain, he finally found it again. By the mid-1980 decade, Al Green had become something rare, a man at peace with himself, yet still capable of moving the world. His transformation from soul superstar to gospel messenger had drawn both awe and confusion. To the faithful, he was proof that grace was real. To the music industry, he was the artist who had walked away from gold to chase something eternal. But even salvation can lead you back to the stage. In 1988, after nearly a decade away from secular music, Al Green returned with "Put a Little Love in Your Heart." It was a duet with Annie Lennox for the film Scrooged, and the message fit him perfectly: love as an act of redemption. The song became a surprise hit, reaching the top of the pop charts and reminding the world that Al Green's voice still carried magic. That return wasn't a step backward. It was an extension of his faith, proof that love, whether sacred or romantic, was still his language. A year later came "The Message is Love," a record that blurred the line between gospel and soul, between church and chart. It was clear now. Al wasn't abandoning his faith, he was expanding it. During live shows, the transformation was breathtaking. He would glide across the stage, microphone in one hand, Bible in the other. Between songs, he'd slip into short sermons, urging his audience to forgive, to love, to believe. The crowd, black, white, young, old, answered with cheers and tears. Somehow, Al Green had found a way to turn a concert into communion. The critics, once skeptical, began to understand. They saw that his rebirth wasn't an escape from music, but a deeper version of it. Rolling Stone called him "a man who sings like he's been to heaven and come back to tell us what it's like." In the 1990 decade, he continued to record both gospel and R&B albums. "Don't Look Back," "Love is Reality," "Soul Survivor." Each project reflected a different shade of his journey, less about chart success and more about spiritual expression. His voice had aged, softened, but it carried something new: peace. You could hear it in the way he phrased his words now. The urgency was gone, replaced by gentleness. The heartbreak that once defined his music had transformed into humility. When he sang, he wasn't chasing redemption anymore, he was living inside it. As time passed, younger artists began to name him as their compass. D'Angelo, Maxwell, John Legend, and Alicia Keys all drew from his tone that seamless blend of vulnerability and strength. Even hip-hop producers sampled his records, weaving his tenderness into beats meant for a new generation. Through them, Al's sound never faded. It simply evolved. The man who once defined soul in the 1970 decade was now defining something bigger: the sound of survival, the beauty of a second chance. His music no longer asked for attention, it offered comfort. And in every note, you could still hear the same truth he learned long ago, that love, in all its forms, is holy. By the time 2000 arrived, Al Green was no longer just a name from the past, he was a living monument. His voice had outlasted trends, his songs had survived generations, and his message of love had become a language spoken around the world. In a music landscape obsessed with speed and spectacle, Al Green's sound remained timeless, a gentle reminder that sincerity never goes out of style. In 1995, he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, standing among the very legends he had once admired: Sam Cooke, Otis Redding, and Ray Charles. When he stepped onto that stage, the crowd rose to its feet before he even spoke. He smiled humbly, clutching the microphone, and said, "I thank the Lord for letting me be part of this." It wasn't just a speech, it was a prayer in real time. The honors kept coming. He was welcomed into the Gospel Music Hall of Fame in 2004, followed by the Songwriters Hall of Fame that same year. Rolling Stone ranked him among the 100 greatest artists of all time, noting that no one else had ever made passion sound so peaceful. The Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award soon followed a recognition not just of career, but of endurance, of grace under fire. Yet, beyond the trophies, Al Green's true legacy lived in how people used his songs. "Let's Stay Together" had become an anthem for love, played at weddings, reconciliations, and even presidential inaugurations. In 2012, when President Barack Obama publicly named it as one of his favorite songs, it was proof that Al's music had woven itself into the fabric of American life. But his reach extended far beyond America. In Europe, his records were treated like scripture. In Japan, collectors lined up for first pressings of his vinyl. Across Africa, his gospel work became a blueprint for modern choirs. Wherever people sought comfort through sound, his music found them. Through all of it, Al never stopped preaching. At his church in Memphis, he still led Sunday services, greeting visitors from across the world who came just to hear him sing in person. There were no tickets, no cameras, just faith. Sometimes, after delivering a sermon, he'd slip into amazing grace without warning, and the congregation would weep. Time had softened his movements, but not his spirit. He no longer chased perfection. He lived in gratitude. His life had come full circle from gospel to gospel again, from rebellion to redemption. The media once called him a man divided between the flesh and the spirit. Now, he was whole. The contradictions that once defined him had become his message. In the end, Al Green's story wasn't about fame or failure. It was about forgiveness, the kind that takes a lifetime to understand. And as the world moved faster, louder, and colder, his music remained a quiet place to rest. He had given his life to song, and through song, he had found his salvation. The morning light once again filters through the stained glass windows of a small church in Memphis. The pews creak softly as people gather, waiting for the man whose voice once filled arenas. When Al Green steps to the pulpit, dressed in a simple white robe, there's a hush that falls over the room, the same kind of silence that used to come before the first note of a song. He opens his Bible, but before he speaks, he hums a tune. That sound, warm, trembling, unmistakable, drifts through the chapel. It's the same voice that once defined love for the world, now speaking of something even greater. In that moment, you can almost hear the echo of every era he lived through. The cheers of the 1970 decade, the heartbreak of 1974, the redemption of faith, all converging into one simple truth, grace. Al Green's story isn't just about the rise and fall of a musician. It's about the human need to find peace after the storm, to believe that even the broken can be made whole again. He had fame, fortune, and adoration, but none of it compared to the quiet joy of singing for something higher. For many, his songs are more than melodies. They're memories of weddings, of heartbreaks, of long drives under soft lights. Let's stay together, love and happiness, tired of being alone, each one a piece of his soul that he left behind for us to hold. And even now, decades later, those songs still reach across time, reminding us that love, in its purest form, is eternal. As the world spins faster, his legacy feels even more precious. In an age of noise, his silence speaks louder. In a time of chaos, his calm endures. Maybe that's what makes Al Green so timeless, the ability to turn pain into poetry, fame into faith, and music into ministry. He taught us that no matter how far we fall, redemption is never out of reach. So when the organ hums and the choir joins in, it's not just a Sunday service, it's a celebration of survival. The boy from Arkansas who once sang for belonging became the man who taught the world how to forgive itself. His story isn't just remembered in records and awards, it lives in every heart that still believes in love, in faith, and in second chances. Let's keep that memory alive. Let me know where you're watching this from in the comments. Grab yourself a warm drink, maybe a cup of water or tea, and if this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Because here, we remember the ones the world forgot.